As a competitive person, I love losing. Well, I guess that's not quite true. I actually hate losing nearly more than anything in the world, but I do appreciate what it gives me, and that's a whole lot of knowledge. I played a lot of card games over the years, many of them at highly competitive levels. But Star Wars Unlimited is kind of a new beast for me. I never played Star Wars Destiny, so the whole priority system and passing and taking initiative is a bit of a foreign concept. So I'm still learning. But I've had the opportunity to play a lot at locals at a number of stores in my region. And I recorded some of those games, and we're going to take a look at least one of them this time around. So let's jump into it. Before we actually get into the gameplay, let's talk a little bit about the list. Now, you can see the name up there, Red Blue Iden V2. I've only kind of iterated on this. Honestly, I took the idea from Tower Number 9, and I believe Thork also had done some videos on this, and I'm sure a number of other creators have as well at this point. But I like how the deck plays. I kind of feel like you have a very strong anti-aggro game. I was a little concerned going into this particular event. I mean, in general, but also I was concerned about playing against what appeared to be almost an entire field of opposing Idens, and a lot of them were green variants. I don't feel like the late game is going to be as good. This was also best of one, so those Avengers and the things in the sideboard over there doesn't really matter. Just focus on the main deck. I knew that going in, that it was going to be best of one. I elected to just go with the list that I had because I wanted to see how game ones felt, just get more games with the deck, which realistically, that's the bottom line. I need more games in general. Overall, I really like it. If you're interested in more thoughts on the deck, let me know down in the comments. I could do a separate video, but let's get on to the gameplay. All right, so here we are. This is round one at Alternate Universes in Bluebell. First of all, shout out to the store for allowing me to record. Shout out to all my opponents for being willing to get on camera. I know it can kind of be jarring for this sort of thing. I've been doing this for years, and I still have a little bit of jitters every time I either get behind the camera, or in this case, I guess, under the camera. We just had a real simple setup. I am still testing things out, so I decided to cut the audio, although it does seem to actually have been pretty good. Let me know if you'd prefer to hear the live commentary rather than me talking about it. But I wanted to review the games because I do want to learn more about what mistakes I'm making, what mistakes maybe I miss even in the commentary, and you can let me know down in the comments. Here we go. It is round one here at Alternate Universes Bluebell. Now, my opponent is Vaughn, and as you can see, they are also rocking Iden. Now, the difference here is, of course, we have Green Iden with ECL instead of what I was running with Tarkentown. Now, I said as much to Vaughn when we first sat down that I haven't played a whole lot of the control mirrors, whether it's this particular matchup or just against any other control deck. And also, I kind of felt as though the green version was going to have an advantage early on, or at least on paper, maybe not early on in the game. That's the wrong way to phrase it. The reason that I believe that is because I think that the green deck is likely more threat dense. Now, this is before you get into what Thork and a number of other content creators have recently been content creating about in the form of the more vigilance-based control decks. So that will come up later, but we're not there yet. The difference here is I feel that between Darth Vader, the unit, as well as things like Devastator, which will appear shortly, and a number of other things that I thought I was at a disadvantage. We're going to see how this game plays out, and I'll update you on my opinions as we go through. So we are watching this a little bit faster than it was actually recorded. As you'd imagine, we're not that quick with with everything. We're just getting set up here. I'm not sure what my mulligan decisions are, but as I play the Viper Droid, we do get to take a peek at Vaughn's hand. We got a bunch of troopers, we got a resupply, and a Devastator. Now, the ramp cards in the form of resupply and Devastator may or may not, and this is the shore trooper that's coming down. I will try and note and make sure that the overlay has the cards pointed out so that way you can tell. Unfortunately, as we're testing this out, the glare has and was a problem. I wanted to apply a little bit of early pressure here and ensure that I had a threat on the board in the early part of the game. Make my opponent try to spend some removal on these cards. That way they wouldn't have it for my later game threat, since I was expecting that I was the aggro in this matchup. I needed to close the game out before the larger threats came online. Now, the confusion here was Vaughn had assumed that I was going to clear the board, but I didn't. As said, I went face. Now, that may be incorrect, as later on, and we see the Snowtrooper Lieutenant come down to buff the Shore Trooper. Shore Trooper ultimately just trades, which kind of circles back to my point that this may be the correct play. Keep your opponent's board clear, and I did play to that later in the game. In fact, a couple turns from now. So we see the Shore Trooper come down to keep the board clear. Why do you want to keep the board clear? Power of the dark side. As mentioned, I'm going to repeat this a lot. I was very fearful of both the Devastator I just saw and generally large, big green capital starships. I don't have a lot of ways to deal with things outside of damage-based removal. It's really, takedown's not going to work on Devastator, at least not off the bat, nor is Dooku. So I need multiple cards to take care of one of their cards. That's how you end up in a card disadvantage situation, and a control mirror. That's probably a death knell. So what I really wanted to do was ensure that I could actually get a clean Power of the Dark Side to eliminate whatever the thing was. Now we see a cell block guard coming down. That's going to try and stymie my offense here. We clearly have the Death Trooper to try and run in, at least at a later point in time. I steal initiative here to try and ensure that. I'm still unsure initiative-wise, and we'll see this in other matchups if I get the other matches up. When I should be taking initiative, I almost feel as though in the control mirrors, I don't want initiative because I want my opponent to commit something to the board, but I don't want to pass on the risk that, oops, I time walk myself. That's the concern. Now, maybe I'm imagining things, and I'm open to comments or suggestions from anybody. Now, the running joke throughout this game was that Gideon that shows up, that guy has a bullseye on his back. In fact, all three of them have bullseyes on their back. Spoiler alert. I haven't had a lot of success with Gideon overall. I do respect the card, don't get me wrong. I do like the card a lot. But here it's going to eat a takedown. Can't talk. Foil takedown. I think that was actually a foil hyperspace, by the way. A ton of Vaughn's cards were hyperspace, so I was a little starstruck at that. Shout out to Vaughn. But we get the trade. The board is once again clear. My opponent healing under 5 damage. And this is kind of how a lot of the game went. Trying to keep the board clear. Again, I was doing it intentionally to try and set up Power of the Dark Sides. I'm sure Vaughn was also doing the same. And I was trying to ensure that whenever that Devastator inevitably came down, we could remove it. But I wanted to present a threat, so I was going to commit one thing to the board at a time. We find out later, again, more spoilers, but we find out later that Vaughn does in fact run Super Laser Blast. I did not know that coming in. Obviously not open deck list. It's just a local event, and we were bantering both before and during the game, but nothing, it didn't let anything on. We do have a Iden deployment here. We're, of course, on turn 6. So I was saving a takedown for Iden in order to remove it. There's an argument maybe I should have kept the takedown. I know I had other removal, although I forget exactly what at the time. There were other ways that I could, I had the Power of the Dark Side, and I was debating between the two. I felt the Power of the Dark Side was better, of course, to save for the Devastators, potentially a Vader, although that would be complicated because I'd have to remove the other piece first. You get the idea. Now, here is one thing that I'm going to pause about, since I did reference it earlier. You can kind of see it all the way up in the corner in the discard here. You can see the Vigilance. So the Vigilance ended up removing this Inferno 4 and then healing base. Vaughn and I talked about this afterwards, and I did reference the Thoric video, and like I said, there's a bunch of other creators that have probably done it at this point in time. But there's a Vigilance-based, I'm going to call it Vigilance-based control deck that reminds me of the deck, if you remember that from 1994 Magic. Yeah, I played a lot of games, and for a long time. Anyway, the point is that the Vigilance deck has that mill win condition, which does come up in this game. And realistically, if the Vigilances that were played by Vaughn were played with the mill portion, this could be a wildly different game, and probably not one that I come out on top of. So it's something to keep in mind. We'll bring it up as other ones are played, because, again, other ones, I know I'm spoiling everything. But ultimately, this one doesn't go for the mill, and I think it ends up being a net negative for Vaughn. So I get my deployment, and I get a little more value overall out of Iden than Vaughn was able to. We don't have the immediate removal. Of course, Vaughn was tapped out. And it was something that I was trying to set up. This goes back to my earlier point about taking initiative and when not to take it or not to have it. I'm not sure yet. The whole initiative thing, as I mentioned earlier, is new to me compared to my experience with many other games. Usually it's your turn is your turn is your turn. Now there's priority, and your opponent can, in some games, play stuff on your turn, but that functions differently than what we're seeing here. It's close, but it's not quite. So trying to get used to it. And we see a super laser tech coming down. It removes the shield. I mentioned that and resupply being kind of dead cards earlier, and I do kind of feel that way, but super laser tech obviously has a little more value because at worst it punches face. It could remove a shield, it could do whatever. And here we see Gideon number 2 coming down because my intent was to try and grow the Iden or whatever, just make them significant threats. Clearly I had a bunch of removal, but Vanquish comes down, targets the Gideon, no longer on the board, and we're seeing Iden going face. Now, we're going to see the life totals yo-yo a lot. It's pretty, it was pretty obnoxious, to be honest, which is completely expected given how these decks play out. And I guess the only way to put this is I'm not clear how you're supposed to finish 2 games, let alone 3 games in the allotted time. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm inexperienced in Star Wars Unlimited. I don't know how much experience Vaughn has, but we were definitely, I feel like we were playing at a reasonable pace, and this game still took forever. So it's going to be a key skill, as many other people way better at the game than me have stated. You need to know when to concede in a best 2 of 3 and say, this game is lost. I'm not going to win this, and move on to the next game where you might have a chance. This is the challenge here. One thing I will call out, because I almost forgot, because this came up right here as Vaughn is playing Ruck, I think. It's the 3/6 green guy that kills things. He's shielded and he kills guys. I think it's Ruck. I don't know who this character is. You can kind of see it there. Also a foil. Probably didn't help with the glare. The super laser tech was obviously ECL'd out. Since we didn't mark it, I had forgotten. I thought the Ruck was coming out immediately killing Iden, but that's where the additional poker chips come in. I've been using a lot of those counters. I haven't even seen the official ones, and I haven't really looked into any third-party ones yet. I will comment that I really don't like putting dice on the base, just because, and we get a Power of the Dark Side here, because I had no other way to really remove this. It seemed like the most efficient. I think at this point in time, I did have a second one in hand, because I knew the Devastator was about to hit the board, so I would not have wanted to play it. But maybe it would have justified it anyway. But if I didn't have the second Power of the Dark Side, this could be a wildly different game also. One takes the initiative here. But yeah, I like writing down. I'm kind of covering it, but like right here, you can kind of see the notepad. I want to do that going forward. It's probably not going to be great for the stream, the videos, but I have a tendency, like, I talk with my hands a lot, and I'm going to bump the dice. I'd rather write it down. So we do see the Devastator finally hit the board. Devastator devastating Iden, but I have the second Power of the Dark Side as mentioned. I don't really have, the way the deck is designed, a lot of its damage-based removal, which is why I feel that Red Iden has a decent matchup or even a strong matchup into aggro, because you can Interceptor, say they're A-Wing, you can Interceptor whatever, Red 3, you could Palpatine to both clear their board and present a threat, although that's later in the game. And I'm playing a Snowtrooper there. Snowtrooper Lieutenant. But against these large things, I'm now, again, as mentioned earlier, 2 for 1ing myself. And we're at the stage in the game where the debate really is on for how many resources you really need. I had a number of turns where I really wished I had 10 or 11 resources because I wanted to play a 4-4-3, or I wanted to go 7-3, or I wanted to go 8-3, 8-2, whatever, like different combinations of multiple little removals or a big guy and a removal, whatever the thing happened to be. But the problem that I ran into was I wanted to maintain threat density. And I think that's going to come up in a lot of these games where the control mirror, similar to other games, it's going to be who has the last thing. You're going to be trading removal. You're going to have a lot of stuff. And speaking of removal, this is where I learned that Vaughn was running Super Laser Blast. There was obviously a potential for it. But Super Laser Blast, this was an interesting one that I forgot. I'm going to pause here because I forgot to ask Vaughn about this because we did talk about the Vigilance plays after the event. But we didn't talk about the Super Laser Blast. So Vaughn, if you're out there, let me know in the comments or hit me up next time I'm at AU. Why was the lieutenant so threatening? Obviously, Super Laser Blast, as we'll see, will have more value, or could have had more value later. Clearly, if my plays would have been different, a lot of the game would have been different if different things happened. Duh, right? If things are different, they're different. You don't say. Stunning philosophical revelation there. But the point is that that 1-for-1 had to feel bad. Can't imagine it felt good. So we're getting a cell block guard here, upgrading the threat, so to speak. As mentioned earlier, I want to keep a single threat on the board, keep applying pressure. Although my opponent can heal whenever they kill something, I am slowly growing their damage count. And that's going to allow me to eventually push through, or at least that was my plan. As mentioned earlier, I feel that as the Red Iden, I am the aggro in this matchup. Whether that's true, I'm not sure. I haven't played enough games of it. So I'm trying to force my opponent, as mentioned earlier with the whole initiative debate myself, trying to force them to play things as we see this reinforcement walker come down. Now, this is something else I'll pause on. 2 points. One, I'm attacking in first, trying to do stuff that doesn't cost resources. Present my opponent with the idea, well, it could be anything. It could even be a boat. So they play, or I attack in, they are forced to, air quotes, forced to play something so that I can then hopefully resource efficient remove it and then continue with my turn, as compared to me committing something, they resource efficient remove it and do the opposite. I want to always try and have that leg up. Is that correct? I'm not sure. I'm open to counter arguments. Now, one thing that's interesting here, Vaughn is, of course, at a decent amount of damage here. Like, remember, 25 health bases. But if you look carefully, there was a card milled there for the reinforcement walker, as you'd expect. It's up here. That's a second reinforcement walker. So we got one here and we got one here. My game plan, as mentioned, was to try and be as threat dense as possible. I know you're going to kill my stuff. I know you have. If you've demonstrated the Super Laser Blast, you've shown Vanquish, you've shown Takedown. You probably have Power of the Dark Side. I don't remember if you played it at this point yet or not, but there's a lot of ways to kill my stuff. So I didn't want to have all my eggs in one basket and possibly just literally run out of ways to deal damage. I don't know if I agree with getting rid of the reinforcement walker because it's only a cell block guard. Yeah, it's going to push damage, but it's not pushing damage that fast. So I'd be curious also about this play to see if anybody feels differently. So we're just correcting things here as we're moving on. Like I said, I don't know if I like the idea here, but the reinforcement walker did scare me. I'm trying to ration. Well, I only have one Power of the Dark Side left, but I'm trying to ration my removal as best I can. I still have Tarkin Town available in case you didn't notice. Obviously, my opponent used both their epic actions already. But with the initiative, there's some opportunities here for me to set things up, even though that thing has 9 health, which is a lot. So the initial play is the Death Trooper. Now, as we're leading up to this sequence, and I put the damage specifically onto the cell block guard because I figured that it's going to end up dying anyway, or it's more likely to die. So we get an Inferno 4 out of there, but the point I was trying to make is I'm trying to whittle down the reinforcement marker. You may have caught the Dooku in my hand. You may have seen some of the other stuff as I'm shuffling around. So I'm putting this up to 5 damage, only 4 health remaining. I mean, now a whole bunch of removal is live, whereas it would have been able to dodge it before. Now, Vaughn here is just taking initiative, and I'm debating how we're going to play this out. I end up initially thinking I was going to take down the Inferno 4, and I realized, wait, I did actually put this into range. So this was a shift in game plan. Like, I probably should have been setting up, and I think I could have set up the Reinforcement Walker to get hit with Takedown in a different way. But this did leave the Cell Block Guard and the Death Trooper on the board, hypothetically presenting threats. But since Vaughn was able to take the initiative back through the sequences that turn, you're going to see what happens. Now, I do end up resourcing, which, again, I had that debate. I think at this point I'm resourcing Regional Governors. It's a card that, both due to my inexperience of what I should be naming, like I could have played it at some point and named Overwhelming Barrage or Super Laser Blast or Vader or another Devastator, probably Overwhelming Barrage because I knew they were in there, but I hadn't seen them yet. And this ends up clearing the board. It would have been way worse if I didn't kill the Walker. Way worse, because then I wouldn't have been able to effectively remove the Walker this turn based on what I had in my hand because of the extra health that it gained. So in this case, Overwhelming Barrage comes down, Inferno 4 able to clear the board, and now I got to find a way to remove that. So we're going to, even though it's buff, Palpatine comes down, deals 6 damage, clear this thing out, and then, again, presents a threat. So I'm trying to 2-for-1 my opponent as much as I can. Even though you're drawing 2 cards a turn in this game, and at this stage, you probably don't need to resource, it's still a matter of, and there's the power of the dark side in order to remove Palpatine, it's still, you're still up cards, forcing them to burn more resources than you are. I'm not sure if card advantage is as important in Star Wars Unlimited as it may be in other games, but that's the way, or at least the thought process for me. And again, I'm open to any criticism or comments that people have to say, hey, no, you dummy, you're doing something wrong. So my Inferno 4, 100% at this point, I'm digging for one of 2 things. The other power of the dark side, I'm pretty sure I didn't have it at this point, or big threats. Hypothetically, I would accept other removal. So you can see there was a, whatever the 3/4 Sentinel is, and something else went to the bottom because neither of those were what I wanted. Now, I think I miss an Inferno 4 trigger when this dies. Got to see. But we do see a Dooku come down in order to get rid of their Star Viper. And then we get a play here. And what is that play? I know you can't really see it. That's actually a Vader, as you could probably guess from Vaughn picking up all those cards. So this was one of the things I was concerned about, and I mentioned earlier that I feel like there is a risk of the green deck being able to overwhelm the red deck. Maybe there's an argument then that, like, if you hit the Vaders, then you could become the aggro as the green Iden. I'm not sure. But either way, Death Trooper comes down to remove the shield, Dooku comes out, and then it's, I guess, a rehash of one of the prequels. Something like that. I don't know. We'll call it that. But Dooku goes down. Vader does have 5 damage on them, so not long for this world. We're just correcting, or Vaughn was correcting something there with the Death Trooper, because obviously you didn't want to put the 2 damage on the Vader. That's probably not where you want that 2 damage. So I'm committing the Ruthless Raider. This will allow me to ping off the Vader while presenting a threat and pushing damage. This is one of the big cards that I found in this game. Whether this is going to bear out for the matchup as a whole, I'm not really clear, but it's a sizable threat. It isn't easy to remove because it dodges takedown, at least initially. It helps deal with the board or get things into range so that you can try and take it down. Like, playing this into a takedown on something probably is fine. Again, I could do that to a Vader or whatever. Now, here's the second Vigilance, which once again heals and removes, but did not mill, which we did talk about afterwards, and Vaughn kind of was onto that plan after we spoke. Somebody must have kicked the table there. Apologize if somebody gets motion sick. We have an open fire to clear out the Death Trooper. I have a ton of removal at this time. We're going to actually be showing that to Vaughn as the Viper droid comes down. So we got the other power of the dark side, Interceptor, Dooku, and Gideon. Okay, so this isn't the, there's another droid that comes down later and shows like 1 million removal cards. But this is still a significant amount of removal plus the threat. So I have a threat in space. It's bigger than their threat on ground. I have a life total lead, and I have a way to 187 their guy and create a threat, aka Dooku. So I have the debate here about, because I do have the Super Laser Blast play in the back of my mind, and at a certain point, this it might be overcommitting here. I don't know how many Vaughn was running, but they only played the one, and we basically go through their entire deck. There was only one card left, so unless that last one was a second Super Laser Blast, I'm assuming there's only one main deck. And this may, like, if I get hit with a Super Laser Blast here, I might be in really bad trouble, and I think that's worth remembering. I'm unclear as to whether I need to do it anyway in order to try to win the game. Like, if they have it, they have it, but if your only line is to apply pressure, maybe you have to. So here we see a Power of the Dark Side, and I really debated between whether to get rid of the Raider or the Dooku. The main decision point was, well, which are they likely to have more of a threat with, space or ground? And I wasn't sure, but ultimately it didn't matter because the Vanquish comes down to put Dooku in the grave as well. And then we're continuing to move on as we're approaching like turn 11 billion at this point. Maybe it was around this point, we did have to clarify exactly what the out of card scenario is when you run out of cards in your deck, and we have a Death Star Trooper coming down. Because we both had a pretty good idea, but we just wanted to confirm. And then the card you can't see up there is Del Miko that was just played, which is something that I really like. It was more annoying to me actually in a later round, but Del Miko, I really like the idea of the card, but these sort of effects, as we get a Ruthless Raider coming down, in games where you can attack things directly, those effects obviously have less value compared to, say, Magic, where it requires another, like a specific kind of card, because there's just plainly more ways to interact with it. I could just punch it. Can't do that necessarily in every game. So in this case, I'm whittling down the Del Miko, which, because I was setting a different play up, I forget what it was, but we get a second Overwhelming Blast, which removes the Trooper, keeping Del Miko alive, and then softens up the Ruthless Raider at the very least, which I don't know if I would have been happy if it ate a takedown. Iden's already gone. Most of my other stuff, both Dooku's are gone, so most of my other stuff probably either dies to it anyway or doesn't matter. I think I have one Ruthless Raider left. So it was annoying, but it's more that combat would make it more complex. So we move on to the next turn. I did have a bunch of Interceptors. So Interceptors allow me to clear out space. Now this leaves Del Miko on the ground, which is obnoxious. But I have this life lead. I have the threats in the air. I wasn't too worried about it, and I knew, of course, eventually I'll kill it and be able to heal some. So we're getting to make an opening in order to clear the Raider. Maybe this would have been appropriate to attack with the Raider first, but I didn't want my opponent to have the opportunity to kill the Raider in combat. But the Raider ultimately takes out Del Miko, and then I try to commit yet another Gideon to the board, and that's another Vader coming down. Vader comes down, and we're getting to the point, you may have seen it shuffle in my hand, but I have some Force Chokes, I think, at this point. I definitely do in the next few turns. And the reason this matters is now Vaughn is up, air quotes, up 2 cards on me because 2 Vaders were played, so there's 2 less cards in the deck. And in conjunction with the Force Chokes that I play later on, we get a Star Viper coming down off the Vader. In conjunction with the Force Chokes, it ends up causing Vaughn to deck out faster. Vader ends up taking 5, obviously eats the Gideon. As I mentioned earlier, this guy has a bullseye like right on his forehead. It is incredibly difficult for me to get this guy to connect, and I get the sense that I'm just playing it incorrectly. So definitely open to suggestions on that front. Here, in this matchup, I don't know how relevant it's going to be or how easy it's going to be to try and set something up. And against aggro, I've had much more success. But we get the second Interceptor coming down because we've seen so many cards. I mean, the redundancy at this point for a lot of the cards may seem a little silly, but remember, this game is on turn infinite, so. We're going to make an opening in order to finish off Vader, and as mentioned, you can see I'm taking notes there. on life total. That's why you're not seeing it on the base. We get the Viper droid coming down. So power the dark side, open fire, double force choke, and make an opening. Fistful of removal, pretty much the definition of. And my entire plan at this point, as mentioned a moment ago, was I'm going to force choke you in order to try and get there. Now, there was the possibility that Vaughn was running a third Vigilance that I didn't see, but since the first two were played, I wasn't really expecting them to actually target me with the mill unless we were down to, okay, you're 0 cards left. So I actually go ahead and force choke the droid, which felt silly because it's like, do I really need to remove this threat? But it was primarily to make them draw the card. I felt like that was valuable enough in order to try and advance this game because I wasn't sure. With only, as you can see, only 9 damage on the base, I did have 6 power worth of TIE fighters on the board, but they're not long for this world, most likely. And even if they were, it's still going to take time to get through the healing, potentially more making openings, that sort of thing. So we see another super laser tech coming down onto the board. As I'm pushing damage there on Vaughn. Again, I'm trying intentionally to leave the resources open, make them at least consider, hey, there's a whole lot of things that could happen. And then I think the play here is, okay, we're going with the Star Viper. So the other one I was thinking of didn't come down yet. Because I think you probably saw it at this point. There's another Death Trooper in hand. So once again, Vaughn was assuming that I was attacking the unit, and this may be correct. Like, Vaughn may be right here. And I'm going to pause real quick. So if I decided to go here instead of on face, I do preserve the removal that's in my hand. The problem is, I don't know if this is a worthwhile enough. The debate is, do I need that removal to deal with a larger threat? And in my opinion, I needed to keep trying to pressure the game and close it out. Now, since it went so long being the aggro, at this point, does it matter? If they're going to take over the game, they probably have all the resources that they have or need. So I'm not really clear on whether that was really necessary. Maybe I should have run in, but ultimately, as you'll see momentarily, I elected to go with the removal path instead. So we get a resupply out of Vaughn. As I was discussing earlier, in my opinion, we get the Ruthless Raider in order to clear out that Laser Technician. The resupplies feel like they're dead cards. So you have 3 dead cards in your deck. Open fire to remove the Star Viper again. I don't want to give them too much healing. This is another potential overextension. If Vaughn was playing double Super Laser Blast or triple Super Laser Blast, it may be that this was a complete error, that I should not have played all of these threats. Maybe I should have run one of the interceptors in. Maybe I should have just not played the Ruthless Raider and instead just open fire, leave the Super Laser Technician, because who cares? And then if Super Laser Blast comes down or other removal comes down, play the Raider later. I might have just gone overboard with this. Ultimately, it's good that the Raider was out because this allows me to preserve some other removal in my hand and then just kill off the Sentinel here with the Raider, which you'll see momentarily. Yep, there we go. So we just charge in. There was a big debate, again, in my head of whether I should remove that out of combat in order to push extra damage. But I think I even said it out loud. I'm just trying to be more patient in this. Now, this was an interesting choice. We get the Dooku coming down. It removes a TIE Interceptor instead of killing off the Raider, which I understand because the intent here from Vaughn was probably to preserve the shield on Dooku. Obviously, it comes down, it kills the Raider goes off, and then I can poke the shield off. I accidentally was playing too quickly and almost I had to wait for my action to come back. But Vaughn plays a short trooper there, and then I play the Death Trooper to ping off the shield, trying to set things up for future removal. We get the heal there from Iden. Once again, as mentioned earlier, we're yo-yoing. But the second Force Choke is coming down. I didn't want to allow Vaughn any purchase, any chance to actually get the ground game going. Keep Dooku off the board. It's a big enough threat that if they could deal with the air, then I can't get through. Like maybe they could race. I did have more removal, but this was also primarily, as you can see there, there's only looks like one card left. I know Vaughn got down to one card at one point. I don't know, and I think it's right here. Just to ensure that no shenanigans could happen. And at this point, I think we were just discussing exactly how the rest of this game plays out, because with the damage that's on Vaughn and the damage I could present in spaces, we see a cell block guard coming down that either I get them through damage or I push enough damage and then the out of card procedure, out of deck, end of game, whatever. You get what I'm saying. Like, Vaughn runs out of cards, starts taking damage. That's much simpler. Get the second Ruck coming down, or however you say his name, and we'll just get in there with the TIE Interceptor. So ultimately, we do take the W here in round 1. So we'll switch gears here. Just final thoughts. I'm not convinced that my initial assessment where the green Iden deck should be at an advantage. Certainly pre-board, maybe post-board it becomes different because the red Iden deck can side in a few more things. Maybe I'm completely off base, and I'm definitely open to other people's opinions. But as it seemed, I think that the Vigilances alone probably flipped this entire game, let alone anything else. And we're not talking, oh, it milled my whatever. No, it's just the fact that it milled, and then maybe the removal. So, for example, the Super Laser Blast gets played a little bit differently, and I don't think I come out victorious in that game. But shout out to Vaughn. Again, shout out to Alternate Universes for allowing us to record, and Vaughn to being such a good sport. I do have to say that everybody was definitely a pleasure to play against, Vaughn included. Definitely a lot of fun. But that's going to do it for this one. Let me know what your thoughts are if you want to see more of these, if you'd rather hear the actual in-game banter, or if there are any other suggestions. That's going to do it. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Tune in next time for more Random Thoughts.